All right, I think we're rolling.
Okay. Well, welcome back. My name's John Swano.
And I'm Dave Tenney.
And we are Two Beards in a Bible. We are looking into the Word of God today. We hope that you find it helpful to follow along and turn in your Bibles and read with us. Today we are starting at Luke chapter 11 at verse 37, and Dave is going to begin reading there.
Yeah, we got some strong words here. So here's Jesus. He's going to address the Pharisees. It says, "And as he spoke, a certain Pharisee asked him to dine with him. So he went in and sat down to eat. And when the Pharisee saw it, he marveled that he had not first washed before dinner. And then the Lord said to him, 'Now you Pharisees make the outside of the cup and dish clean, but your inward part is full of greed and wickedness. Foolish ones, did not he who made the outside make the inside also? But rather give alms of such things as you have, then indeed all things are clean to you. But woe to you Pharisees, for you tithe mint and rue and all manner of herbs, and pass by justice and the love of God. These you ought to have done, without having the others undone. Woe to you Pharisees, for you love the best seats in synagogues and greetings in marketplaces. Woe to you Scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites, for you are like graves, which are not seen, and the men who walk over them are not aware of them.' And then one of the lawyers answered and said to him, 'Teacher, by saying these things you reproach us also.'" Well, that's some strong stuff here, Johnny.
Yeah, I kind of let loose on him there.
Now, what's funny here is, so he says all of this stuff, and then there's this other group here, the lawyers, and they get kind of offended. They're like, you're not talking necessarily about us, but you are kind of.
Right.
So.
Yeah, and that outside of the cup is clean, but not the inside. That if that doesn't describe a good portion of the religious world today, where we have maybe this squeaky clean, look on the outside, but not so much. And I can remember, without naming names and getting too specific, I remember growing up with a group of people that were in a religious group that they believed that there was a definite age of accountability, and I don't remember what their time was, but the kids that attended that assembly, they were the wildest kids at school. They got into all sorts of stuff and caused all kinds of trouble. And then once they reached that age, that all clicked off, and they became the most pious acting people on earth. And it's interesting.
It is interesting.
And it really kind of lends to, I don't think we can turn it on and off like that.
No.
I think that this, if we have Christ, and we truly believe that He is who He says He is, we're going to follow His word, and it's going to be something that continues, not something that turns on and off.
Yeah, depending on who we're around, right?
Right. And that's a very present danger for each and every one of us.
He starts off this whole conversation about, the Pharisees see him, and they see that Jesus doesn't wash his hands before dinner.
Right.
And, I have done that. Mm-hmm. Depends on what I'm doing. If I'm out cleaning a chicken house, I'm going to wash my hands.
Right.
But, if I'm if I'm putting a puzzle together with Charlie, maybe I don't. Right.
I have one child that is a germaphobe. And
I know that child.
And we'll give her away here. She will ask me sometimes, "Did you wash your hands? Did you wash your hands?" And I'm like, "Don't worry about it. You've lived this long.
You'll make it a little while longer."
Right.
But the Pharisees, this was a thing. And I got to thinking as I was reading this, I'm like, well, was this some like a law in the old law to where you had to wash your hands before was this some part of Moses' law?
Yeah, well, the law was very much involved with cleanliness.
It was.
And when you look back at some of the things that the people of God had to do, it was really about purification and keeping them safe from the things that we now know and can see under a microscope. Mm-hmm. That the God knew about those things.
But I'll tell you what, I was not able to find anything in the old law that said you had to wash.
Specifically.
That specifically said you had to wash your hands before dinner.
Right. And so that very well could be one of those things that creeps in. We tend to have traditions even today in the Lord's church. I know that at one point, one of the assemblies that I attended in the past, they switched from doing the Lord's Supper from before the sermon to after the sermon, and you'd have thought that the sky fell out, on top of us.
Yeah.
And so, and there are arguments on both sides, and we're not going to get into that.
Yeah.
Right
Well,
now.
so I did an invitation last week at on a Wednesday night, and I knew the audience. There was nobody in there that wasn't a Christian. There was no reason to offer to say anything about baptism because I knew there was nobody in there that needed baptized.
Right.
And my wife, she's kind of like, you needed to mention that. And I said, well, that's a tradition we have.
Right.
I don't totally agree with all of that, but
Now, I always do, and it feels kind of strange sometimes.
yeah.
When I know that everyone in the building has been obedient to Christ, but I record the things and put them out online,
Yeah.
so I do it for that reason. But yeah, you're right, and I'll tell you, it would feel strange if I didn't.
Yeah. But it's a tradition we have.
And there's that thing, the one again with like even dress. The place that I come from, the elders said if you're going to serve publicly, you're going to wear a coat and a tie. Now, we can't find that in the scriptures, and I personally believe there's good reasons to do that, but, if I know one time I forgot my coat at home, and I felt woefully naked, to get up in front of the group and preach. But that's a personal feeling. I do ascribe to the feeling that if you're the preacher, that they ought to be able to tell that you're the preacher, and whether we like it or not, there's some kind of stigma that goes.
There is.
But that's a subject for a different day.
Yeah.
That's just my personal thing. I wouldn't.
One of our elders wears coveralls because he's a farmer.
Right.
So it just
and when you travel the world and the country,
yeah.
you'll see that. I mean, I'm friends on Facebook with preachers from other parts of the world, and you can see that there are differences in the way that people dress. They do what they can. And
I have a friend who said that they were worshiping in England, and they don't offer an invitation there at all. They don't have a song after it.
Okay.
So he felt really awkward because it was different.
Yeah.
I have another friend who was in Romania for a long time. And when they partake of the Lord's Supper, they use wine. That's just there's nothing wrong with that.
Right.
It's just that's what their culture is.
And it's for us to think on these things. And when we think here of the example of the Scribes and the Pharisees that are, I think hypocrite is synonymous with them from what we see in the scriptures, so much of the time. At least that's what it seems, that they were the ones waiting in the wings to point the finger all the time at Christ.
They're constantly looking for something to nitpick at him about.
And we, being humans, we got to be careful that we don't do that.
Yeah.
Because we have a tendency to do those things.
I've been guilty of that.
Yeah. It's sure. If you're as much of a car guy as I am, maybe you scan the parking lot to see which one of the unclean brethren's driving a Chrysler.
Hey, John. Whoa.
But anyway, that's we have those things that we become accustomed to do, and we have to remember not to bind where the Lord hasn't bound.
Right. Yeah. He goes on and he talks about, you already kind of covered about the inward part, and the outward part, they wash the other. But he says, he gives them some advice. He says, but rather give alms of such things as you have, then indeed all things are clean to you. He kind of gives them a little bit of advice. Live it.
Yeah. Don't
just make a show. Live your faith.
Of all things that you have.
Yes.
And that's just this last Sunday, the sermon that I preached was on giving. And we talked about in the Old Testament how, the Lord's people gave of everything that they had.
Was that because you need a new car?
Right. No. I made it quite clear that Because that's the common thing. All the preachers talking about money again.
Yeah, he must need something.
But we do need to think about our giving, and the one of my points was that the Lord's people have always been commanded to give of everything.
Yeah.
So as we think about our giving, are we just being showy and I got to make sure everyone sees that I'm putting a check in the plate?
Yeah.
And then, but are we actually? Is that all we do? Is that all?
Hopefully
we do?
not.
Right.
He talks about the Pharisees. He says, you Pharisees, he says, you tithe the mint and rue and all manner of herbs and pass by justice and the love of God.
Right.
Well, so he says, that they're really careful that they give a tenth of every little bitty thing that they have.
Right. And what's the New Testament law for giving? How much are we supposed to give? Is it still a tenth?
No, we're supposed to give as we've been prospered.
And as you purpose in your heart.
As we purpose in our heart.
Right. And that's and that's if we take care of our heart, and if we truly put the Word of God in our heart, then the giving will take care of itself.
Now I've talked about this many times, and I've made the point that should we give a tenth? No. But here's a lesson in that. If you look back, in the Old Testament's for our learning. So God was happy with 10%. And no doubt, all of us, when we've trying to decide what we should to give, we've thought, well, how much is God going to be happy with? Well,
right.
There's an example.
Right.
I'm not saying you have to give a tenth. I'm just saying,
as long as you arrive at that number because you've decided in your heart that that's what you want to give, not because you've looked up the holy formula.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, you should give more than a tenth.
Right.
I mean, really.
Right. Absolutely. And that's, as we think about, we like things to be all neat and tidy. Just give us a checkbox list and let us tell us what we have to do. And when you think back to the Lord's people, they clamored for a king. They wanted a king, and God told them, this is not a good idea. You don't want a king. But why did they want a king? They wanted someone to tell them what they should do and to take care of their problems. And in a lot of ways, we're no different today.
Yeah.
We just, hey, tell us what we got to do, and we'll do it.
Yeah. Yep. That is true. So he continues on. He tells about all these things that they ought to have done. And he says, woe to you Pharisees. And he talks about them having the best seats in the synagogue, so everybody sees them. And he says, they like everybody to say, hi in the, because they're important people.
Right.
And then he says, for you are like graves which are not seen, and the men who walk over them are not aware of them.
Right.
That's some pretty heavy stuff to think about. So he's telling us that them that are basically dead.
Yeah.
Yeah. All of these things that they do, they're for naught.
And not only are they dead, but they're truly forgotten in the grand scheme of things.
Yeah. Yeah. People who walk over them, they don't even know.
Right. Right. You think that people are paying attention and that people are watching every bit of your movements, but in reality, you're just not that important.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that. Go ahead. I have a thought.
You go for your thought.
And it's kind of somewhat unrelated, but it ties in. Growing up, I used to go sled riding at a hill near my grandparents' house, and we would go sled riding down that hill all the time, my cousin and I. And then years later, came to find out that there was an old graveyard there that was on that hill. And someone had, at some point in the past, taken all the gravestones down and built a wall in their yard from the gravestones. And
That's not very nice.
That wall was just over on the side of the hill from where we sled rode. But they took those stones back and tried to put them up where they thought. But all those years sled riding up and down that hill, we didn't know that there were graves underneath of us there. And it just kind of brought that to my memory. Yeah. Nothing deep there.
No, no, but it makes an illustration of the point
right
there. then in the end here, the last verse I read, verse 45, he says, "Then the lawyers answered and said to him, 'Teacher, by saying these things, you reproach us also.'" And a lot of these lawyers, they weren't like lawyers today. They weren't like lawyers that went to civil court and, you got back then you get a walking ticket, right? You were walking too fast. You walked through a stop sign. So you got a ticket. And these weren't the kind of lawyers that were going to go to court with you.
Right.
These were lawyers that were students of the law. And when the law that they were students of was the old law. And by and large, most of these lawyers kind of sympathized with the Pharisees. So I think, when Jesus is talking about the scribes and the Pharisees, they're getting a little bit offended there. That's why I say you reproach us also.
Right.
And now Jesus is going to just lay into them.
Right.
And
it kind of goes in line with when we think of, even today, you think of the type of mindset that it takes to be a lawyer or maybe an engineer or a judge, something that takes some meticulous looking at something, even preachers, and it takes a very focused mindset. And sometimes we've got to take a step back, and not be so laser focused on our checklists again.
What's that? Well, you can't see the forest for the trees, right? You're so focused on just the minutia that you miss the big picture.
Right, exactly.
And I've been part of that many times.
Yeah,
I've
sure.
done that.
I mean, as human beings, it's something that we all have to guard against and watch for.
I remember one occasion, John, that I was asked to do something at work, and my boss had this thing, and I'm thinking, that's the dumbest thing I've ever heard. And then like 6 months later, I'm like, man, that was pretty smart. Because I was just looking at minutia.
Right.
I wasn't looking at the big picture. And so we can all be guilty of that.
Right. Absolutely. Well, I'll go ahead and continue reading at verse 46 in Luke 11. And he said, "Woe to you also, lawyers, for you load men with burdens hard to bear, and you yourselves do not touch the burdens with one of your fingers. Woe to you, for you build the tombs of the prophets, and your fathers killed them. In fact, you bear witness that you approve the deeds of your fathers, for they indeed killed them, and you build their tombs. Therefore the wisdom of God also said, I will send them prophets and apostles, and some of them they will kill and persecute, that the blood of all the prophets which was shed from the foundation of the world may be required of this generation. From the blood of Abel to the blood of Zechariah, who perished between the altar and the temple. Yes, I say to you, it shall be required of this generation. Woe to you, lawyers, for you have taken away the key of knowledge. You did not enter in yourselves, and those who were entering in you hindered." And as he said these things to them, the scribes and Pharisees began to assail him vehemently, and to cross-examine him about many things, lying in wait for him and seeking to catch him in something he might say, that they might accuse him. Kind of sounds familiar.
It does. It does. They're out there, and that's like from the beginning of this. That's what they were doing.
Right.
But now he uses that term of vehemently.
Right.
and one commentator said they were hostile.
Yeah.
I'm like, yeah.
Right.
That's exactly what it sounds like.
Right. And where's it? Did it say there? Oh, in verse 52. Woe to you, lawyers, for you have taken away the key of knowledge. You did not enter in yourselves, and those who were entering in you hindered. That's kind of deep.
It is.
What's the key of knowledge?
I mean, obviously God's law. I think that's like. I think that goes all the way back to where you read verse 46. He said that they load men with burdens hard to bear. Mm-hmm. They hid God's truth, and they came up with their own truth that was impossible for men to follow.
Right.
And it wasn't even required of men. Mm-hmm. They hid the true knowledge of God.
Right. And I even get the feeling that it might have even looked something like, well, we know what we're talking about. You're too lowly to understand this. And there are religious bodies yet today that tell their people, their followers, don't read the Bible. You listen to us.
Yeah.
and will tell you.
I mean, I think that's why, there's certain place. I think I believe in China, that, the Christian quote unquote churches, that are there are not allowed to have their lessons in Chinese.
Huh.
Right. You can have your church, but nobody's allowed to understand what you're saying.
Right. It reminds me of, the places that do things in Latin.
Yeah.
You walk in there, and maybe some people know Latin, but I remember going to some of these places and thinking, I don't know what you're saying.
Yeah. There's not far from where I work, there are these, and I don't know, there's these like Catholic monks, and it's some sort of Latin thing, and I see them all the time walking down the road, and they have like a brown monk suit thing, not Monk from the TV show. They're not solving crimes. Usually going over to get to the grocery stores where I see them. But
Interesting.
yeah,
I wasn't aware of that.
Yeah.
Interesting. Yeah. So there we have, we see that harsh criticism. We see that, they're hypocritical men, and they're just seeking after basically to do away with Christ. He's a threat to their livelihood.
He references them killing the prophets. And I looked that up, and that was something that I always think of Jezebel, when I read that, because in 1 Kings here, chapter 18 and verse 4, it says, "For so it was, while Jezebel massacred the prophets of the Lord, that Obadiah had taken 100 prophets and hid them 50 to a cave and fed them with bread and water." But there's lots of accounts in the Bible where the prophets of God were killed. That didn't guarantee they were going to live for a long time on this earth.
Right. In much the same way today, there are those that actively seek to wipe the truth of God's word out of people's minds and take it out of it. Just as you mentioned, in other countries where it's illegal to own a Bible, it's illegal to speak of such things.
Yeah, I know when the Soviet Union was formed, the USSR. Of course, that went on for about 50 or 60 years. Sometime, I believe, in the 1920s till 1991, I think. And that was one of the things that the Soviets did, was they tried to get rid of all religion. Of course, it didn't work.
Right.
It's just people that have faith in God. I don't care what you do to them, they're not going to move away from that. But they sure did their best.
It's say something here that I think it's almost innate in mankind to seek after a creator, to look towards, because nature just kind of, as we know from the scriptures, nature.
It attests.
It does. It attests to the creation.
Yeah.
And mankind just seeks for that.
Yeah, I will. I've said this a million times, but only an insane person would look around at nature and say, "This was an accident."
Yeah.
It makes that's insanity.
Yeah.
That's like looking at a cell phone and saying, "Well, this was an accident."
Right. Right.
And like,
there was a car crash down the road, and out popped an iPhone. From the
crash.
Right.
Yeah. It was the Big Bang, right?
It just doesn't make any sense.
It doesn't. And if you believe in science, I don't know how you couldn't believe.
Isn't it even, it's been a long time since I sat in a science class of any type, but isn't it one of the basic principles of science that you can't bring order out of chaos?
Yeah. Yep.
So even as far as I know, science would attest to that. But again, you've got to have help to think that way.
Yeah. I mean, I think as a society, we have moved way far away from what we would have traditionally called sound science.
Right.
It's we've moved away from things that can be proved to things that are theories that cannot be proved. And then we're saying, oh, this is a new truth.
Operated a whole lot on feelings.
Yeah. Yep.
Yep.
What are we doing on time here, John? We're about
24, I think.
We're about out of time here.
Yeah, we might as well end it here and then pick up on the next page here. So with that being said, we're glad that you joined in with us. We hope that you found it to be an edifying time. We hope that you look into the scriptures some more, and hope that you come back and visit with us again. With that being said, have a good evening, and we'll see you next time.
Yep, thanks.